She's halfway through the chorus when the lights sharpen. Then the world goes thin around her, like someone flipped a switch on the air. The audience murmurs, 100 phones already waste, and in the second between inhale and fall, a woman who has been trained to command every gaze loses the power to hold it. The woman is Lila Hart. Her voice has filled arenas for a decade. Her face is on magazine covers and on the billboards that glitter above the city trains. Tonight, she is rehearsing a benefit concert inside a glass-walled studio, her team clustered in earpieces, stylists hovering, producers checking sound levels on bright tablets. The cameras are tuned, the lights are set to paint her in gold. There is a guest list, and a guest list within that guest list. VIPs who pay for backstage passes, managers with precise agendas, networks with cameras that will cut to air if anything interesting happens. Behind the curtains, the room belongs to other people. Stagehands, costume assistants, a crew of cleaners who move like a tide through squeezing hours. Bernard Kellerman is one of them. He has worked nights at the Beacon Studios for 6 years, a steady presence in a fluorescent vest, a janitor by title, and a small city fixture by temperament. Bernard knows the stage like a second map, the scuff marks on the stage apron, the way the floor hums after 1,000 feet. When the crowd applauds and the stars take the light, he is the invisible seam holding things together. He is not on any guest list. He carries a mop and a thermos. His hair is the color of coffee gone cold. He wipes at a spill near a caterer's table when the first sharp noise cuts through the chorus, Lila's voice, trying and then catching. People think she missed a note. Bernard thinks she's about to faint. They all have a few moments of hesitation, the sort of tiny calculus that decides if you act. Will I be needed? Will I be blamed? Will it be awkward? Before Bernard makes the decision that will change everything. He runs, pushing through the crowd as the lights bloom white, hands reaching, the air scented with someone else's hairspray. He's there first. He steadies her, calls for help, remembers a handful of things from a community class he took years before after his daughter's asthma scare. He does what needs to be done without rhetoric, with the quiet competence of someone who has spent his life solving immediate problems. Hold the head, open the airway, clear the space. Someone else calls an ambulance. Someone else hits record, because that is what cameras do. Bernard's hands, calloused and work-worn, are on Lila's chest. For 3 minutes he counts compressions under his breath like a prayer. For 3 minutes his whole world is the small, urgent job of keeping a life moving. Then the cameras find him.
There is a long, ragged exposure of light from the arcing studio lenses, 100 mobile phones catching the motion, and from those thousands of frames, someone crops the one they will use. In that single freeze frame, Bernard looks like everything the internet can be trained to misinterpret. A man with his hands near a woman in a vulnerable position, in a moment when context is absent and judgment is immediate. Without the seconds before and after, it's a static tableau that can be given any caption. A still is a liar that the world believes. The clip, carefully chosen, aggressively captioned, spreads first through backstage WhatsApp groups, then to the feeds of scrappy bloggers who make a living out of outrage. It sprouts angrier iterations, captions that claim too much, comments that assume motive. By midnight, it is a trending topic and a hashtag full of assumptions. Lila Hart's name is in bold at the top of every search engine. Bernard's name is not listed anywhere. He has no polished biography, no press agent to call. He has a child at home, a rent check due, and the kind of work history that looks tidy on a ledger and invisible in public. The studio's lawyers hate ambiguity. The production manager hates risk. The official response is a short, carefully worded statement. We take allegations seriously. Bernard has been suspended, pending investigation. His locker is sealed. The next morning, his security badge is revoked, and his supervisor hands him a brown envelope that smells faintly of hospital disinfectant and apology. It is a termination letter. If you want the full story behind the viral clip, subscribe. This is where the camera narrows and where the rest of it starts to matter. Bernard walks home in the gray light before the trains stir. The city does not look any different, but his eyes are new to it. He shoulders a bag of work clothes. He moves through a scrape of alley and familiar stoops, through the smell of frying onions and laundry detergent. He reaches his building, a narrow brick walk up where pipes rattle in the night and the radiator in the hall beats like a tired heart. His apartment is modest, a narrow living room with a sagging couch, a small kitchen whose cupboards are half full and half hope. On the couch is Molly, 10 years old, jacket still on, eyes tracking the news on their old TV screen, where a talking head describes the photo with a practiced outrage.
Molly's hair is braided and a little uneven at the end. She has her father's hands when she fiddles with the hem of her sweater. She likes making paper airplanes, baking cheap cookies on rainy afternoons, tucking a tattered stuffed rabbit into the crook of her arm at night. She is the reason Bernard learned CPR in the first place, because of a winter night when she coughed and stopped, and Bernard swore he would know what to do if the world tried to take her. She is the reason he stays steady when everything threatens to tip. Did they say anything?
She asks, voice small, like an ember. They said a lot that doesn't cover the truth, Bernard says. He is careful with his words with Molly. He has learned that children smell panic before adults do. They index their world on the steadiness of the ones who love them. He smiles for her like a man who knows how to be steady even while the ground shifts. The smear arrives in the form of notifications. Emails from temp agencies asking if he wants work washing dishes. A voicemail from the union office saying they are sorry but can't help if charges are pending. A message from a neighbor who once borrowed sugar and now avoids him in the stairwell. The landlord presses, more polite than cruel, about rent. A bill collector leaves a message full of gentle threats. Someone posts their own cropped screenshot with the incendiary caption, "Ask yourself, what was he doing with his hands?" It gets 100 shares. A local talk show uses the freeze frame as B-roll while pundits reframe condemnation into clever syllables. Social media bites and chews. It has no patience for nuance. The studios call lawyers. The producers call an emergency meeting. The PR firm puts out another statement. Lila Hart is deeply shaken and requests privacy while authorities investigate. It is the facade of concern. It is also a cordon to contain liability. Bernard feels it in small humiliations that have nothing to do with press releases. He is denied a second interview at a janitorial company when the manager looks at the headline and says, "We like our staff background checked." He has passed in the shelter line for a week's overtime he could use. The kid at the bodega refuses to sell him cigarettes on credit when he reaches into his pocket for the change he doesn't have. The smear leaks into the city like oil. It stains people's reactions, hearing the accusations before the truth. Janet, the neighbor who keeps spare cups of tea in her kitchen and worries like someone scoring every moment of life as precious, comes over with a thermos and more outrage than the city seems to have left. Janet is a retired nurse with a voice that can scold dogs and warm casseroles. She sees Bernard like a son and sees Molly like the daughter she never had. "They'll eat him up," she says, hand on Bernard's shoulder. "But you did right. That's what matters. We'll get a lawyer. We don't have the money," Bernard says. He thinks of the rent, of the school fees for Molly's after-school program, of the small deposit for an apartment with a reliable landlord. He thinks of all the ways dignity costs money these days. At night, he scrolls through the comments. He shouldn't, but everyone with a bruise checks where it's tenderest. He reads the worst ones, and then the ones that are kinder, the ones from strangers who say they believe him.
In the middle of the noise, a small piece of footage finds its way into the hands of someone with a conscience. A full, uncut camera angle, one of the run-and-gun stage cameras whose footage should be proprietary, that shows Bernard's motion from the second before the fall to the ambulance arriving. It is not cinematic. It is a patchwork of emergency personnel and a man breathing like he is trying not to wet his shirt. It is the truth. Meanwhile, Lila Hart sleeps in a bed on the other side of town that looks like a cloud in a boutique hotel and wakes up with ash in her mouth. She is 9 years into a career the size of a small country and has been taught to wrap disappointment in professional language and keep moving. Tonight, she is a person who almost died. Tomorrow, she will be a person whose image is worth millions to the people around her. Her manager brings coffee and checks in on her like she is an expensive instrument. But the night after the still goes viral, she cannot rest. The cropped photo haunts her, an indictment posted under the glow of streetlight in the middle of the night. She thinks of faces in the crowd, the smell of the stage, the taste of adrenaline. It takes her 2 cups of coffee before she asks someone to pull the raw footage and not the trimmed, darling clip that should only be used sparingly for teaser reels. She requests that the tape of the entire incident be brought to her privately. Her team is hesitant. PR people love the safety of a statement. But under the fluorescent light of her living room, she sits with the playback, alone but for the memory of the room, watching the full seconds that never made it to the feed. She sees Bernard's hands full of purpose. She sees him steadying her like someone who had nothing to prove. She feels a new sensation then, not the shallow panic that lives in a headline, but a moral discomfort. The frame that was used by millions is exposed as a dishonest fragment. She sees how it can be cut to make a fiction. The footage hands her a reality that does not match the caption beneath the still. Guilt is a large animal that can't be hidden in a closet full of cameras.
Lila's first instinct is to make it right quietly. She asks for his name. She asks to be connected. Her assistant produces a name and a number and a file addressed to Bernard Kellerman that looks small and inadequate next to the phenomenon he has been thrust into. She wants to call. She wants to apologize. She wants to unwrap the scandal like a knot and release it. But she is not alone in the room with her conscience. She is surrounded by people whose job is to sanitize discomfort. Tyler Brigham is her PR lead, a man in a neutral suit who smells faintly of too much deodorant and absolute certainty. Tyler arranges narratives the way other men arrange ties. He is skilled at triage, deflect, contain, and then repurpose if necessary. He is the kind of professional who sees human beings as optics.
He listens politely as Lila speaks the words that have become sticky. Find him. Make sure he's okay. Tyler nods at the reel, his face blank. In the gleam of the monitor, he is a silhouette with a to-do list. We can do damage control, he says. We can issue a clarified statement. We can reach out, privately, and compensate for medical bills. We can set up a foundation fund in his name. We can give him a token of gratitude. He says the word token, like it is a currency, like the literal cost will sting less if it is called assistance. Lila hears Tyler offering a script. She sees how the word token sits under the moral fat of his proposal, like an icing over a cake you didn't mean to eat. I don't want a token, she says. Her voice is rawer than he expected. I want him to be okay. I want to make sure they stop saying he did something he didn't do. Tyler shifts. We do need to consider optics, he says carefully. A private apology is great, but the internet doesn't eat private. The narrative is out there. We can issue a public clearing statement, but there will always be those who spread the cropped frame. We can put out the footage. He names possibilities that are measurable. Press releases, video clips, a carefully edited behind-the-scenes package with a caption that frames the correct story. Lila's face hardens. If she has spent a decade learning to control the way cameras love her, she has never learned how to control her own guilt. In the end, she makes the call that will bring Bernard into her orbit. She wants to meet him. She wants to see him standing, to apologize in a room without lenses. Tyler seems surprised, then accommodating. He arranges a contact with someone who has Bernard's number, someone who can find him and help. A production assistant calls and leaves a name, a polite message. Miss Hart would like to speak with you. When Bernard answers the phone, he thinks at first it is a scam. Over the line, a voice says, Mr. Kellerman, this is Lila Hart's assistant. Miss Hart would like to meet with you about what happened. Bernard's pulse stutters. He stares at Molly, who is doing homework at the table, and for the first time in days, the future has the shape of something other than a list of problems. The meeting is arranged at a small back room, a private conversation away from cameras, or at least that is the promise. Lila arrives with a small entourage and a sober face that has not yet learned how to look small in public. She carries flowers as if to apologize by habit. She speaks like someone who is unused to being undone. I don't want to make this about me, she tells him. She means it at first. Bernard understands the weight of gestures. He does not want a story wrapped around him like a shawl. He wants the smear gone so that he can sit in the laundromat and no one whispers. He wants a letter or a note to his landlord.
He wants the online feed corrected so Molly's school doesn't have to field mean questions. He knows what he needs, and it is small and sharp and practical. Lila offers more. She offers to pay medical bills, to secure temporary housing, to give a donation to a fund that helps emergency responders. She arranges for a lawyer to intervene, his dignity by being wary and grateful at once. But the world is louder than a meeting. Tyler sees an opportunity, and he sees in the meeting an opening for narrative management. We've got to take control of the story, he tells Lila in a low voice after they leave the room. If we don't, someone else will. We can't just be reactive and hope the truth swims across. We have to put the truth in front of people where they'll accept it. Tyler frames what he calls a platformed redemption. He imagines a televised special in which Lila tells the story of what happened, an intimate segment in which she thanks the man who saved her life. He imagines an edited package of the full footage with a voiceover of compassion and accountability, with B-roll of Lila visiting Bernard's neighborhood. He imagines a moment that will return the narrative control to Lila's team, recenter her as vulnerable and grateful, and cleanly collapse the smear. There's an even stronger move, Tyler says, tone slick with the smell of spreadsheets. We put him in the spotlight. We make him the human face of the story. He comes on with you. He
He sings a song. It'll be a shared moment. Viewers love that. They'll attach to him. They'll see a man who loves his kid and put him in a position where the audience has to see him as a person, not a headline. He says it as if it is obvious, as if human beings can be shifted from accusation to adoration through a curated moment, as if dignity can be manufactured by 10 camera angles. Lila considers the idea. She imagines Bernard on stage with her. He has a low, quiet voice she heard that day when he counted compressions, those breath-steadying numbers that were not for an audience. She imagines him answering questions about Molly and nodding beside her as she thanks the cameras for being patient. Something in her skin recoils. She does not want to make him a prop. She thinks of the orphaned way the world clips people's lives into tiny frames and tosses them on a pile. And if he doesn't want to sing, she asks. Tyler smiles like someone who has rehearsed objection. We can be gently convincing. We can offer compensation. We can frame it as a fundraiser. He's helping raise money for first responder training. We can make it about purpose. There is an entire ladder of persuasion behind his tone.
He slides a card across the table with an offer that looks clean. A stipend for Bernard and his daughter, guaranteed housing, a short-term contract. It is, strictly speaking, generous. It is also a reasonable price for a human life if you are trying to make a brand out of contrition. Bernard hears about the idea from the people trying to help him, the lawyer, Janet, a woman from a local outreach program. The word spotlight tastes like metal in his mouth. He thinks of the small pleasures he protects for Molly, a place for her to do homework, a steady schedule of after-school snacks, a bed that does not shift when the radiator kicks. He thinks of being thanked without being humiliated, of being seen without being turned into content. He imagines that if he accepts it, he will be stepping into a maelstrom that sells his private life for public consumption. He is offered a choice that is not really a choice. Accept the performance and the money, and the moral mess will be smoothed for him. Refuse and watch strangers keep telling themselves a story that hurts his daughter. He feels cornered and noticed at once, two sensations that can feel like different kinds of violence. When the call comes, he is sitting at his small kitchen table, Molly's homework spread around them like a constellation. The voicemail is polite and precise. We would like to pay you to appear with Ms. Hart on our special. We hope you'll consider it. We can arrange transportation and accommodations for you and your daughter. He listens to the message twice. He watches Molly's eyes as he thinks. They want me to sing, he tells Janet later when she comes by with a casserole and a glare for the world. Janet's eyes widen in a way that could read concern or amusement. They're asking a janitor to sing in a TV special, she asks. Do you sing, Bernard? He tells her he hums at home. He sings to Molly when she sleeps sometimes, low and steady. But the difference between singing to a child and singing on air is the difference between a whispered self and a performed one. Singing for money from the people who nearly expunged him from his life is a strange currency. It feels like being asked to repay a debt with a performance. Bernard thinks of his father, who taught him that dignity is sometimes quiet, that pride is not the same as stubbornness. He thinks of Molly's wide eyes when she asks if they will be on TV. She is 10 and believes the world can be fixed by one big, bright thing. He wants to tell her yes and mean it. The production team makes their offer more urgent. It's live next week, a producer says over a phone line, voice practiced. It will be prime time. This is your chance to tell the truth. She says it with the casual optimism of someone who believes narrative can be reset by a single segment. Bernard says nothing at first. He remembers the way Lila looked at him when she thanked him, like someone who feared she was insoluble. He could feel compassion in her eyes.
He could feel the rest of it. He understands the machine that seeks to monetize the story, but he also understands his daughter's bookshelf and the rent envelope. In his apartment, he holds Molly's hand and watches her sleep later that night. He imagines her small chest rising and falling. He hums a wordless line. The thought of giving her a better world pries open room for calculation. The thought of being used as a prop nails him to the floor. Somewhere in the city, a producer types a headline into a document and runs it by Tyler and Lila. From stagehand to star, how one man saved Lila Hart. Another version says, Janitor sings in heartfelt tribute. The project is dressed by committee in phrases like human interest and authenticity. They frame him as the human who will anchor their narrative and the donation drives. At the same time, Bernard's legal counsel pushes back. If you appear, you'll have to sign a release, the lawyer says, tapping the pen against the paper. Media always asks for rights. There's a clause about not disparaging the network. There's also a confidentiality section. You deserve to see the whole sheet before you sign. The lawyer is protective and admitting of his own limits. Public exposure can save the moment or sink it. He tells Bernard not to sign anything on the spot. Bernard sits with the document and sees the alleyways of conditional consent. A compensated apology is a slippery thing. It offers money that can stabilize a roof and hushes certain kinds of conversation that could lead to structural accountability. He thinks of the managers who chose to fire him, the pictures that declared judgment without evidence. He wants restitution that changes systems, not just a framed certificate and a check. Meanwhile, the story is already moving without him. The truncated still continues to feed the rumor mill. People choose their version of the man they want to blame. Newsrooms smell conflict and scent ratings. A freelance photographer posts another angle, another freeze. The city's gossip mill churns, and the smear grows a life of its own. Lila sits in another tiny room, her dressing room, full of photos of past tours, and watches the world that will become the backdrop for her public life. She thinks about the small man who put his hands where someone else would not. She thinks about how she has always been photographed in perfection, and how being imperfect feels like a private humiliation. She feels a sharp remorse at the thought that a man who saved her life should ever taste shame for it. Tyler brings up the idea of a staged moment one last time, softer now. If you ask him to sing and he agrees, Tyler says, it will be a moment of grace that people will love. If he refuses, we can still have him speak. But the melody, people love bridges. They will forget the still if they remember the song. Lila sees the dangerous seduction in that sentence, the idea that a melody could outweigh a lie.
She knows music has power. She also knows the danger in thinking art can absolve injury. The idea that a heartfelt duet could erase a smear feels both plausible and obscene. On a rainy morning, Bernard receives a personal call from Lila. Her voice is quieter than he expected. "We want to make sure you and Molly are taken care of," she says. "We want to help. There will be a televised special next week. I'd like you to join me, if you feel comfortable. Maybe sing. If you don't want to sing, speak. Whatever you'd like." He hears 1,000 hands in the sentence, publicists clicking as she says, "Join me," producers calculating camera positions, lawyers drafting releases. He hears also the small girl in the next room whose future depends on a steady rent check. He tells her he needs time. He tells her he will call back. He hangs up and leans against his kitchen counter, eyes closed, thinking of the first time he ever sang in public, a church choir for his aunt's birthday, a half-remembered song that made the people around him smile. He thinks of the count he did that night, 1, 2, 3, and how counting kept a tiny life tethered. He thinks about how a single act can make you visible in ways that frighten and in ways that save. Somewhere between the rehearsals and the decision, the city continues to hum. Newsrooms warm up camera batteries. Social feeds create alt versions of the narrative. Molly's teacher calls in, a polite question about what the school should say. A local organizer sends a note about systemic protections for workers. A neighbor drops off a casserole and an unasked-for prophecy. You'll do what's right for Molly. Tyler and the production crew begin to schedule a run-through. They talk about lighting that will be soft and human, about a segment that will have an emotional payoff. They send Bernard a list of song choices and a wardrobe suggestion. Nothing flashy, a simple sweater to signal authenticity. Beneath that, in the fine print of the offer, are the things Bernard's lawyer wants to unspool: the release, the rights, the non-disparagement clause. The city moves toward the night of the special like a wave toward a rock. For some, it will be a brand reset. For others, it will be the only lifeline they are offered. For Bernard, it is a choice that will mean exposing himself and his daughter again to cameras that have already been careless. On the eve of the taping, Bernard sits on the stoop outside his building, the street lamp painting him in an orange pool. He watches a delivery truck pass and thinks of Lila's fragile apology in her private voice. He thinks of Tyler's polished sentences and the producer's eager optimism. He thinks of Molly asleep on the couch with a small hand over her rabbit's nose. He knows what the world would have him be, a cautionary tale packaged into a segment for 10 minutes of ad revenue.
He knows also what he could be, a man who holds his dignity and uses attention to edge out a better life for his little girl. The moment before a big decision is a narrow space. He opens the letter the production sent, an itinerary, a list of talking points, a clause about rights, and at the bottom, a single line in plain type. "We'd like you to sing the closing song with Miss Hart." The words sit like a choice someone else has drafted for him.
He thinks of the first time he saw the internet reframe his life with a freeze frame and understands the risk. He thinks of the rent and of Molly and of Janet's casseroles and the lawyer's cautions. He thinks of Lila's face when she watched the full footage and of the private apology she offered without cameras. The next morning, the production van pulls up to his building. A camera crew will come by to pick them up. They will put him in a car and take him to a room lined with lights, where he will be made into a symbol. Lila rehearses by herself, voice steady, preparing to be publicly human. Tyler rehearses too, practicing the speech that will transform PR into penance. Bernard looks at Molly sleeping and makes a decision that is not clean and not entirely pure. He packs a small bag, folds Molly's rabbit into a pocket, and wakes her gently. He does it because hope often arrives with strings attached. He does it because sometimes dignity is not a place you own, but a place you are allowed to hold when others make room. He steps into the van with a man from the production and a woman who will be his escort. The city slides by, and the studio waits with its promise of lights and microphones. He breathes in and thinks of the sound of the last count he ever made, how it was a line thrown over something heavy, and he knows that tonight one song could untangle a lie. At the studio, Tyler meets him at the door with a clipboard and a professional smile. "We'll make this easy," Tyler says. "You'll be with her. We'll rehearse. Just be yourself." Bernard nods. He has never been good at being anything but himself. He takes a last breath and walks toward the room where the cameras will be warm and the world will watch. He is ready to tell a truth, or at least to try. Behind him, unseen in the folding shadows of the green room, Lila practices the final chorus, eyes shut, fingers trembling with a regret she doesn't yet know how to speak. She has arranged the whole thing thinking she is steering toward restitution. She has not yet understood how quickly the truth you try to manage can make you feel culpable in ways you cannot undo. When the stage manager calls places, the bright glow of the light strips the world into outlines. Bernard stands by the microphone with the playlist in his hand, the song's chord chart folded like a small map. Lila steps into view, and for a moment the cameras take breath with them.
Then, before the mics are hot, and before the director calls action, a production assistant brings a tablet with a new edit. It's a compilation sent by someone else, an influencer with a wide following who recut the footage to fuel speculations and attached a caption that implies something ugly. The tablet lights the room with a renewed frenzy, and the room fills with the sound of whispered concerns and the click of people changing calculations. Lila looks at the screen and then at Bernard. She feels for the first time in a way that cannot be mediated by press kits, the weight of asking him to sing under this glare. The idea that had been framed as making him whole now sits like a wager she has placed with someone else's money. She sees him, real and exposed, and she knows she cannot fully predict what will happen when a quiet life is turned into a performance. In that instant, as the director calls a final check and the audience of lights shifts to a low hum, the pressure that she had placed on him out of a desire to repair begins to twist into something else. The realization that staging his voice for her story may serve her need to control the narrative more than it serves his need for dignity. She feels regret, sudden and stark, like a cold wind through an open door. But the cameras are already rolling. The studio is tuned. Bernard stands by the mic, and the moment they have been negotiating for days hangs in the air like a note waiting to be sung. He looks at Lila and finds in her eyes a new expression, an apology that has not yet found its words. He inhales and prepares to decide whether to turn his voice into the thing they ask or to refuse and keep the moment private for his daughter. The lights brighten. The director whispers "ready" into his headset. Somewhere down the line, an operator is waiting for the human moment that will change 1,000 feeds. The city holds its breath. The people who picked the angle that smeared him watch their own chips fall. Bernard opens his mouth. He does not know the cost of what will happen next. Lila watches him, and in the sudden exposure of the studio she tastes a regret that she cannot put into a press release. The cameras find them both. The world leans in. Bernard breathes into the microphone like someone settling a storm. The studio light is a warm coin pressed to his face. The director's voice is a distant hum. The audience's applause is a pressure against his ribs. He starts with a sentence that is not a speech at all, but a small, honest pivot. "I didn't do anything but try to keep someone breathing." The words are plain. They land like a hand on a shoulder. At first, he speaks because the producers have asked him to. Then, as the cameras find his face and the world narrows to the rhythm of his voice, he speaks because the truth needs a voice that is not edited.
He tells, simply and without flourish, what happened that night. How he felt the body go limp. How he counted compressions like numbers on a rope. How the noise around them simplified into a line of work that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with being a neighbor. He mentions Molly in the same breath. Her name catches in the throat of the studio in a way that makes several camera operators blink. And he tells the audience something everybody in the room understands, even if they came to watch the star. He did it because he could not do it. Then he sings. It is not a show-stopping arrangement. There are no flourishes engineered to make playlists blur. It is a voice that has been rehearsed on subway rides and in church basements, a low tenor wrapped in a grit that is honest about work and slow with tenderness. He chooses a song that is half hymn and half lullaby, a small melody he always hummed to Molly when she had a fever. He squeezes the microphone with careful warmth and lets the first line hang. The sound moves through the room like light through a thin curtain. People stop talking. The camera's steady. Lila's eyes fill. The producers, who had scheduled cue cards and rhetorical arcs, suddenly feel the tent of their control loosen. Tyler sits in the control room watching the live feed, a cluster of numbers in his headset, and he can feel two currents running against each other, the polished script that promised narrative control and the unruly human moment happening on stage. He is not yet panicked so much as disoriented. His instincts, which have always served him, tell him to reassert the plan. But something else hums in his ear, the rumor that a junior assistant has been whispering to an independent journalist about raw footage. He tightens his jaw and pulls a folder into his lap like a talisman. Across the internet, reaction is immediate and messy. The initial hashtag that weaponized the freeze frame, sharp, accusing, efficient, meets its countercharge. Clips of Bernard's full actions, full frames, and context begin to circulate. A small cluster of independent accounts with modest followings post the full camera footage that had once been private. People watch in real time as the compressed narrative unravels. The freeze frame that looked damning is now surrounded by seconds of context, Bernard's hands steady, Lila's face slack with the lack of oxygen, a medic arriving. Those who had leaped to judgment find their shame dawning in public. Someone in the production office, Marcus, a junior camera operator who had watched the clip be weaponized while knowing the raw tape, sends the uncut file to Fiona Reyes, an independent journalist who runs a small investigative feed known for following worker rights stories. Marcus's fingers tremble when he hits send. He has a rent to pay and a supervisor who might ask why he released proprietary footage.
He does it because he cannot live in the middle of his shift with the memory of an innocent man being eaten by a narrative he helped frame. Fiona's post hits like a splinter in a smooth surface. Her caption is careful and blunt. Watch the whole clip. Context matters. She threads screenshots of internal messages, redacted but enough to show intention, and a short explanation about how a still was cropped for maximum outrage. She tags the studio. Her followers are modest but engaged, the kind that amplify because they know how to make noise matter. Within minutes, her post is picked up by a larger account, known for debunking viral lies. The tide turns. Back in the studio, cameras pick up the movement of people shifting in their chairs. The director catches sight of the feed rolling on a secondary monitor. The producer whispers to Tyler. The whisper leaks into the room the way a drop of water finds cracks in concrete. Lila listens to Bernard sing and then speaks, not from the script Tyler put in her hand, but from a place that has finally found words it can stand behind. She steps toward the microphone when his song ends and does the thing she should have done on day one. She names him clearly, thanks him publicly, and pronounces the truth without the filter of spin. "Bernard Kellerman saved my life," she says. Her voice breaks on the last word. The studio breathes with her. Tyler opens his mouth to cue an edited clip that framed the moment his team had planned. Soft B-roll, a sweeping voiceover about gratitude. But the control room is already losing shape. The clip most people are watching is no longer the polished edit. It is the uncut footage that Fiona posted, the full reality with all its blunt, human detail. The internet sees the whole thing at once. A laborer acting without calculus, a star saved, a smear undone. The narrative control Tyler coveted dissolves in a wash of viewers who demand accountability for the people who manufactured the lie. In the audience, some of Lila's longtime fans feel their allegiance humbled. Others find in Bernard's words a mirror of their own quiet heroics. Comments bloom beneath the feed. "This is the man we should have been talking about. Why was he fired? Where's the apology?" The studio's phone systems light up. The PR firm's inbox swells with demands. The first public tweet from Lila herself is a short, incandescent thing. "I was saved by a stranger. I owe him more than words." She does not hashtag it with brand finally copy. It is written like a letter. Seeing her type, feeling the air shift, Tyler does what he was trained to do, reach for mitigating moves, for statements framed in legalese and cooperative language.
He pitches a press release that contains the right words: apologies, clarifications, a pledge to review internal policies. He is calmer on the outside than he feels inside, but Lila refuses the sanitizer.
In the green room, when cameras are still warm with breath, she tells Tyler she will speak directly. She will not let his words stand in for hers. Bernard is reinstated within 48 hours. The studio's board holds an emergency session when journalists begin calling and donors ask pointedly about governance. The manager who handed Bernard the termination letter is put on administrative leave while audits are launched. The email thread that Tyler thought was private, a line where a staffer suggested they neutralize the man by turning him into a feel-good prop, leaks in full to a reporter's inbox. It becomes a headline in a morning paper. Was a janitor's dignity traded for a PR moment? The headline tastes like consequence. But the most immediate shift happens in public feeling. Overnight, benefactors who had tuned their gazes toward the star and away from the workers now redirect support. Donations to Bernard's temporary housing fund flood in, small stacks of money from strangers who felt wronged by the cruelty of snap judgments. Anonymous gifts arrive with notes: "I'm sorry we were so quick." A local community center that had once been a polite source of press pics organizes a legal fund for him and his daughter. Janet drives to the studio the morning after the special and hugs him like shelter. For Lila, regret is not a soundbite. It is a physical thing that excavates under the surface of her life and leaves furrows. She regrets in precise waves that she lived for decades in a culture that sees people only as optics, that she allowed her team to suggest a staged redemption as the default solution, that she had not demanded to see the raw footage sooner. But regret in her is not passive, it becomes action. She starts by public apology, not a PR-crafted statement, but a video posted on her own channels in which she speaks to Bernard and to the thousands of people who had rushed to judge without knowing. She narrates the sequence of choices that led to the smear and names the structural problems she now sees, how quick edits and viral stills can decide a person's fate. She announces, with a steadier hand than many expected, a commitment, a fund that will not be a token, she insists, but a resource governed by workers and community leaders that will pay medical bills, support legal counsel for temporary suspensions, and build an emergency wage pool for on-site staff. Tyler takes responsibility publicly in the way middle managers sometimes do when the weight becomes too great. He resigns. His resignation is quiet and phrased in executive terms. In private, he is more jagged. He tells colleagues that he misread the room and underestimated the moral clarity of the star he served. There is no dramatic public shaming. There are consequences, nonetheless.
The studio commissions a review of its policies. The producers who had pressured for immediate damage control are asked to step aside pending a broader conversation about worker protections and editorial ethics. Bernard gets more than an apology. There is a lawyer, funded by Lila's promise and a small group of donors, who ensures the termination letter is formally rescinded, and an official statement is posted on every platform that formally carried the freeze frame. The statement is clear and notarized. Bernard Kellerman performed life-saving measures on Lila Hart. The depiction that circulated online was a misleading crop of the event. There is a public comment from the city's labor office that they are opening an inquiry into worker treatment at the studio. The network issues a correction and a pledge to consult with employee representatives on how staff are portrayed in the press. Still, Bernard understands the symbolic distance between a notarized letter and the practical reality of life. Lila's fund offers to pay outstanding medical bills and the back rent that hovered like a threat over his family. She arranges temporary housing, an apartment 2 blocks from Molly's school, with space for homework and a small patch of light where a plant might grow. She personally meets with Molly and buys the child a new rabbit, stitched in a way that will not crumble after 1 month of love. These gestures matter because they are tangible. They help take the sting out of being rendered public in a way he never asked for. The most consequential restitution, though, is structural. Bernard is offered a role not as a mascot, but as a consultant, a liaison position between the studio's facility staff and executive leadership, tasked with helping design a worker protection program that includes clear procedures when incidents occur, a right to immediate access to legal counsel, and an employee advocacy board with real authority. He is offered this because several people, Janet included, demanded more than charity. They demanded systems that reduce the chance a neighbor can be vilified again. At first, Bernard is skeptical. He has never wanted credit beyond the quiet kind. He thinks of dignity as private. But he does accept the role for polite, sharp reasons. Molly's school fees, the steady income, the chance to make sure no one else is fired for doing the right thing. He takes the job with a cautious modesty. He will sit in meetings, he will say nothing flashy, he will tell the truth. The first item he insists on is a transparency protocol,
Uncut footage must be preserved and accessible to independent mediators when disputes arise. He wants to prevent freeze frames becoming weapons. Not everyone approves. A few voices in the studio whisper that the company moved too quickly, that the fear of reputational damage made good people act in shape.
Those whispers dissolve eventually. The more public consequence is a letter from the studio's union and a series of training sessions instituted across production companies that directly address viral misinformation and worker protections. A small but real policy change ripples outward. Production companies that work with major stars begin to adopt similar rules, citing public scrutiny as the reason they must change. Lila becomes an active participant in the rebuild, refusing, at first, to let the responsibility be framed as a PR victory. She funds the worker-governed fund and invites Bernard to help design the funding priorities. She sits in community meetings and listens. There are moments of awkwardness, people who remember the freeze frame, people who feel the money could have been better spent elsewhere, but she will not let the conversation be performative. She uses the remainder of her tour to spotlight stories of backstage workers in long-form profiles, not as props, but as subjects with agency. Her team learns to listen. Tyler, who had been a fixture of her backstage life, retreats into other projects. He writes a short internal memo about lessons learned and attends a handful of ethics workshops because he recognizes, finally, that the currency he traded in, control, is not the same as responsibility. He loses a job but keeps a future. There are quieter reckonings too. The freelance blogger who first pushed the crop without seeking context faces a public reckoning that is not purely punitive. Her readership punctures, and she must do the hard work of reflecting on why shock and speed had become her currency. She posts an apology and a gift. Her platform now insists on verification before magnifying images that can ruin lives. It is not the same as restitution, but it is a tiny shifting of culture. Bernard and Molly settle into the new apartment with the modest rituals of people who have been through a moment and know the work of staying. Bernard takes his new position with the slow, careful attention of a man who understands what systems feel like from below. He speaks at meetings in plain language, sometimes stumbling over legal jargon, but always returning the conversation to basics. Dignity, clarity, warmth. He refuses to be made a mascot. He insists the fund have advisory members who are cleaners, drivers, and other behind-the-scenes staff, people who have seen the backstage and know its dangers. Molly grows into the new stability with the resilient appetite of a child. She makes new friends at school and keeps her rabbit for company. She asks questions about the cameras and the way people behaved. Bernard answers honestly, but simply. He does not want her to grow up thinking the world is simplified into good and bad headlines. He tells her about nuance and about the courage of small acts.
He hums the lullaby he sang on air and tucks her in at night with the same counting he used to make when he did compressions, a different kind of steadying. Lila watches from stages and dressing rooms and hotel windows as a program she did not want to be the center of begins to change the centers of power. She reads the emails from staff thanking her for pushing for staff representation in the fund. She receives letters from janitors in other cities detailing similar stories of misinterpretation. She feels regret each morning and obligation each afternoon. She begins, not without difficulty, to allow the cameras to capture her learning. Press conferences where she names error, panels where she listens longer than she speaks, grant announcements where worker voices are front and center. Her feed becomes less a shrine to a single image and more a space for conversations. Her record sales do not vanish. Fans who stayed curious appreciate the honesty. The arc of consequence sweeps beyond individual actors. The studio institutes a mandatory training on rapid response ethics for social media. The city's labor office updates emergency response guidelines to include protections for non-employee workers at large events. A coalition of production companies forms a compact to preserve raw footage for mediators when controversies erupt. It is far from utopia. These are small stitches in a tear that had been allowed to fester. But they are stitches nonetheless. There are complications. Not every manager involved in the smear is fired. Not every headline turns to apology. Some online voices continue to argue or to hoard suspicion as a form of identity. Bernard receives a handful of hate messages even months later. The internet's memory is an uneven ledger. He reads the worst of them and then sets the phone down. He chooses, each day, which noises deserve attention. The most intimate and perhaps most important scene comes a few months later in a small civic hall where the fund's advisory board convenes. The room is lit by practical fluorescence, not the flattering gold that had painted them in the studio. People sit in folding chairs. Custodians from different production companies. A school teacher who has organized after-school programs in neighborhoods adjacent to venues.
an independent journalist, and Lila Hart, who listens more than she speaks. Bernard sits at the head of the table, not because he commands dramatic presence, but because his steadiness has become the reason people trust the conversation will not be performative. They make decisions together. An emergency wage pool for staff suspended while incidents are investigated. A legal phone line for workers who fear they will be misportrayed. A requirement that any footage used in a public statement be reviewed by a neutral third party. There are arguments about details and friction about budgets. It is not a moment of spectacle. It is the slow, unglamorous work of institutional repair.
Bernard's voice is calm and often practical. He says things like, "Make it so that my job doesn't end because someone wants a headline." People nod. After the meeting, Lila pulls him aside into a hallway that smells faintly of coffee and paint. She does not bring a camera crew nor a script. She reaches for his hand the way a person reaches for a bandage that must be applied again. She apologizes in a way that is exact. She says, "I'm sorry I let you into the light like that without asking." Her apology is an admittance of complicity and also a promise of vigilance. He accepts it without dramatics. The two of them are not made into a fairy tale. Instead, they become a pair of people whose lives, once intersected by crisis, will now be tied to responsibilities. Months later, a report rolls out from the studio's internal audit. Some managers are disciplined. There are public letters from the production company promising to change protocols. Bernard is offered a permanent position designing worker safeguards across a group of venues. It is not a glamorous job, but it is meaningful and sustainable. He accepts. Part of the position involves training crew how to document incidents ethically, and a small budget for emergency housing for workers with dependent children. He uses his influence carefully, refusing invitations to celebrity interviews that would turn his advocacy into content he did not direct. The world continues to thrum around them. Lila performs songs about love and loss and the way the road bends toward the people who help us. Sometimes, when she is in smaller towns on a tour that used to feel like a conveyor belt of adoring faces, she spends time with backstage staff in ways that were impossible before. She asks about brake policies and water stations and the way floors are kept safe. She brings along small gifts, but more importantly, she brings listening. Bernard and Molly move into a modest apartment with a balcony that looks out over a park where a line of trees tremble in the wind. On Sunday mornings, they sit on that balcony with a thermos of coffee and waffles, counting the small satisfactions that stitch a future. Molly practices piano at a school that offers free lessons for children and families helped by the fund. She takes to music in a private way, and sometimes sings with the kind of clear, immediate joy that makes Bernard laugh when he thinks of the night he counted compressions like a prayer. In the quiet hours, Bernard thinks sometimes of the freeze frame that nearly erased him. How few pixels can contain so much malice. He thinks of the weird economy of being visible and how dangerous it can be to be seen only as an image. He thinks too of the people who rallied. Janet with her casseroles, Fiona who amplified the truth clip, Marcus who risked his job to press send. He writes them notes of thanks, small things that mean more to him than public medals.
Lila, after a long season of learning and listening, writes an op-ed that is not self-exculpatory, but rather an outline of what celebrity responsibility might look like. She names mistakes and makes concrete pledges, funding for worker-driven oversight, a binding compact among major acts and studios to preserve and release evidence ethically, and a pledge to use television time, not for spectacle, but for context. The piece is shared and critiqued and shared again. Some call it a beginning. That is what she wanted, not absolution, but the start of a conversation that does not let a single freeze frame speak for people. There is a quiet ceremonial moment when the studio invites Bernard to speak at a small press conference announcing the worker-governed fund. He stands at the podium, the same hands that once did compressions, curling around a microphone. He says little, but he says it plainly. Doing the right thing should not cost you your job. It is a sentence both old as morality and new as policy. Reporters take notes. The camera lens is kinder now, trained on more than a face. People sometimes ask Bernard whether being thrust into the public eye changed him. He answers by telling a simple story about Molly, how, after the special aired, she came home from school and wrote him a note that said, "Daddy, you were brave. Thank you." He keeps the note folded in his wallet like a talisman. He says the truth. The attention saved them in a way the internet could not have imagined, but also demanded a price he did not know he would have to pay.
he looks at the world with a more cautious faith. As for the famous singer whose name titles the scandal, Lila's regret becomes the engine of her public life in a new way. She is still a star, her songs still sell out halls, but when the cameras roll now, when the world leans in for an image, she thinks of Bernard counting compressions and of the small courage of people who make public life possible. She spends her fame like a tool rather than a shield. Her instant regret, captured in an unguarded backstage glance as she watched Bernard stand in the studio light, stayed with her. It turned into action that changed policies and gave a voice to workers who had been silenced under the hum of spotlights. The city does not become perfect overnight. There are setbacks, critics, and those who will always prefer the comfort of quick judgments. But a small, important thing has changed. There are now systems that make it harder for a single frozen frame to eradicate a life. The fund exists. The protocols are in place. The people who once obscured truth have been asked to answer, and they have been forced to listen. On a late afternoon, months after the special, Bernard and Molly stand on their balcony, watching commuters crowd the street below.
Molly points to a bus and says something about school. Bernard smiles and hums the lullaby he had sung into the studio microphone, and without thinking of audience or optics, he counts. 1, 2, 3. The sound is ordinary, domestic, like the stitch of a sweater closing. It is for him the steady act of a life someone once fought for. Some headlines will still crop images and feed easy outrage, but now when that happens, there are people who will step forward with full footage and with systems to hold those choices to account. Bernard's name sits on a memo board at the fund office now, 3 simple words typed into an email signature: Bernard Kellerman, Worker Liaison. The title is not glamorous, but it helps keep the world from forgetting that dignity costs attention, and that attention can be used either to wound or to heal. Lila Hart's face never leaves the public stage entirely. Sometimes she is photographed laughing, sometimes she is photographed looking tired with the grind of schedules. One night, after a small benefit where she and Bernard both attended as equals, she sits with him and Molly at a table that is free of cameras. She reaches across and squeezes Bernard's hand, not with the hollow formality of a stage prop, but with real gratitude. She says, "I am sorry I tried to make you into a moment." He nods, not because apology is currency, but because it is true. They sit in the ordinary company of people who have done what is right, and now must live with the consequences. The last scene is simple. They stand on a balcony with the city breathing below, a sweep of lights, trains that move like slow punctuation. Bernard watches Molly trace constellations she invents in the darkness. He thinks of the night he counted compressions, of the freeze frame that could have been a verdict, and of the way a forced-to-sing moment, an ugly phrase they had used in headlines, ended up revealing a more complicated truth, that coercion by PR could be turned back into agency when the person coerced chose dignity. Lila's regret was instantaneous when the cameras rolled and she saw Bernard not as a prop, but as a person. That regret did not evaporate into noise. It became a driving force for repair, for policy, for listening. It did not erase the damage the smear caused, but it redirected power toward people who had never been seen. If you believe in restoring dignity and want to see more stories about ordinary courage pushing back against public cruelty, like and share this video, and subscribe for more stories that shine a light on the people behind the headlines.